Story 1. There was a book in which they discovered immortality and then had to deal with many consequences. One of those was marriage. I think they ended up placing time limits on all marriages. It was a good book by Drew Magary Postmortal. Side note, my favorite book by him is The Hike. It is very strange, but I loved it. Story 2. It's a new nightmare. An entire industry has risen to create more traditions for renewal celebrations, and now you have to attend increasingly elaborate parties and destination renewals. Even the more subdued homespun renewals require buying at least a nice bottle of scotch. I probably couldn't afford to keep up with more than 2 friends at this rate. It's all in my head. Story 3. My parents used 7-year contracts that they rewrote and renewed. With 8 children and 54 years together, it worked well for them. Renewal ceremonies were family reunions rather than elaborate parties. Story 4. Happily married people would have to wait in a long, annoying line every 10 years, which would put everyone in a bad mood. Marriage renewal officers might be rude and condescending because of the difficult members of the general public they have to deal with every day. Story 5. This would change very little. Not renewing a marriage after 10 years when you have substantial joint property and children is no different from a no-fault divorce and would be equally messy. If you do not have any joint property or children, a regular divorce is relatively painless. Essentially, without no-fault divorce laws, any marriage can already be treated as a renewable contract. Story 6. People would likely wait until it is free to divorce, keeping their relationship intact longer to allow the relationship to heal. Story 7. All that step-sibling porn will become more realistic. Story 8. More people would not merge their lives the way they do in a traditional marriage. Everything would be about mine and yours. Honestly, dividing up our lives sounds terrible. Who gets the couch we picked out together, the cats we raised, or the plate we bought in Europe? Nobody knows, and hopefully nobody ever will. Story 9. I would add a twist where, every 10 years, the children are forced to participate in a Hunger Games or Battle Royale-style contest to determine whether they are fit to remain members of the family. Story 10. It is the same as phones. I am pretty happy with the one I have now, and even though new ones are thinner and more attractive, I just cannot justify the expense of switching. Story 11. Renewal. A short story. I had been putting off the re-registration paperwork for a month. It was the summer of 2032, and Sarah was on a trip to Mexico with her sisters, so I had the weekend to myself. Sure, it was common to see a counselor before a couple's re-registration date, but I was still nervous. I remember walking into the office and thinking how much it looked like my dentist's office. Old magazines, fake plants, and the whole works. It wasn't that I couldn't see myself with Sarah for another year. We had settled into a pleasant, comfortable place in our relationship. Yet each year, in the months before our anniversary date, anxiety and doubt crept into my thoughts about re-registering. For one, there was the monetary cost of hiring a lawyer to help with re-registering the relationship. On top of that, there was the long wait at the Department of Motor Vehicles and the awkward 15-minute interview with the government officiant. But it wasn't these specific points of friction that stressed me out. I couldn't help but think of the anniversary as a potential stopping point for a relationship I wasn't 100% sure about. I tried to communicate all this to the counselor. Look, this is something I've worked with a lot of people on. You're not alone here, she assured me. I'm not here to point you to the right decision, but I want to make sure you're making an informed decision. I'm guessing you've heard of data consultancies? I responded. I knew where she was going. With the hundreds of millions of data points the government had, data consultants could come up with a fairly accurate prediction for any given relationship. Because the government wanted to promote improved decision-making in relationships, appointments at data consultancies were fully covered by universal health care. Sarah and I were old-fashioned and had never considered going to a consultancy. But maybe now was different, I thought. In the 1950s, a group of Harvard researchers began a decades-long study on happiness with the goal of finding the main drivers of happiness in people's lives. The study had 2 main findings. The first was that relationships were the key driver of happiness. Other factors like career or financial well-being paled in comparison to having healthy, fulfilling relationships. This finding mostly confirmed what people already knew intuitively. The second finding was more surprising. The vast majority of relationships began by chance and were maintained by inertia. One participant met his future wife because they happened to sit next to each other in his high school band class. They married 3 years later after an unplanned pregnancy, and they remained in that mostly unhappy marriage for the next 40 years. The researchers found many stories like this. 80% of participants' close relationships were formed simply by chance. In addition, participants' unhealthy romantic relationships continued for an average of 7.3 years before action was taken to end them. Essentially, the Harvard researchers concluded that people were dealt a random hand when it came to relationships, and they largely stuck to it. An average of 1.8 years and a median of 0.8 years, the data consultant muttered to himself as he viewed the results on his computer. I remember staring at him blankly. The data consultant turned to look at me and cleared his throat. We have a predictive model trained on nearly 1 billion couples, and there are millions reasonably similar to you and your partner. Couples between ages 25 and 30, Asian male and Latina female ethnic combination, similar responses to the questionnaire, fourth time re-registering. On average, their relationships last 1.8 years, and the median is 0.8 years after the fourth re-registration. I frowned. That doesn't sound too good to M. He interrupted. My job isn't to make a value judgment either way. I've just emailed you the exact distribution of potential outcomes for your relationship. You can examine that later. I pulled out my watch and began looking over the summary statistics and visualizations he had sent me. While it is not my job to provide a recommendation, it is my fiduciary duty to help you gain as much information as possible before making this re-registration decision, he continued. There's a lot of data that can help you see how good a fit you and... Sarah, I said. Yes, Sarah. Anyway, using your social media data, I can help you find a set of highly compatible potential partners who are in reasonably close proximity. You can then view the compatibility scores of these potential partners alongside the compatibility score I assigned to Sarah. With that information, by then I had tuned out. I had heard about academic studies linking higher compatibility scores to longer, happier relationships, and I had also heard the rebuttals that called this connection a self-fulfilling prophecy. Detractors argued that couples who knew their high compatibility scores would naturally feel more confident in their relationship, and that confidence would translate to more re-registrations and longer relationships. My thoughts turned to Sarah and me. If we had an absurdly high compatibility score, would I feel more confident in our relationship? And if we didn't, did that mean we couldn't improve our compatibility score moving forward? Then it clicked. I got up and began walking out of the office. The consultant must have thought I was upset by the results he had shared with me. But as I left, I couldn't stop smiling. Compatibility scores were a static measure of something that wasn't. Compatibility grows, evolves, and changes. Over time, I had found that Sarah and I had begun converging. I started going to church with her now and then. I also noticed her listening more to the same jazz artists I liked. Our compatibility had grown over the course of our relationship simply because of time. Sure, Sarah and I may not be the absolute most compatible partners for each other today. There are billions of people in the world. There's bound to be some woman who would have a higher compatibility score than Sarah. But fast forward 20 years, and I bet Sarah will be the most compatible partner for me. Give a healthy, happy relationship enough time, and you'll both naturally become the best possible partners for each other. I got into my car and just sat there, grinning to myself. Better get started on that re-registration paperwork, I thought. Before the 1970s, price flexibility was a standard assumption in economic models. This assumption relied on individuals responding quickly to changes in market dynamics. Beef prices go up, and burger vendors quickly raise burger prices. In the 1970s, however, economists from Berkeley found this was not the case in many situations. For a burger vendor, changing prices on a menu could be enough friction to prevent a price increase. In short, these economists discovered that human decision-making can be affected disproportionately by minor friction points. The Berkeley economists also explored how the power of friction could be harnessed for good. Given the seminal research on happiness by the Harvard team, they were primarily interested in using friction to improve people's relationships. Soon, they began to work with government officials on the topic of friction. In a country with growing inequality and stagnating growth, government officials were eager to explore new levers to improve welfare. Through several randomized controlled trials across different states, economists partnered with local governments to test ideas about how friction could improve relationships. The results of these experiments, the economists hoped, would provide the government with new tools for boosting people's well-being. Meanwhile, critics accused the government of collaborating with ivory tower academics to strengthen its grip on people's private lives. Most people, however, were apathetic about the studies on friction and relationships. After all, these studies would take decades, they reasoned, and it was unlikely anything would come of them. Sarah and I never re-registered our relationship for that 4th year. When she got back from her trip with her sisters, she was dead set against re-registering. She had also seen a counselor and a data consultant but had reached different conclusions than I did. "Jack, look at me. I promise you this will be the best for both of us. You won't know it, but I'll be praying for you," she said. Those were her last words to me. I haven't seen her since. But Sarah was right. A year or so after we broke up, I went back to that data consultant. Given my social media accounts and the government's data, they found 23 suitable partners in the area who were deemed extremely compatible. On the 23rd date, I met Kate, my current partner. It's been 30 years, and we've never looked back. Story 12. Sorry, kids. I would love to have you at the house, but your mom included you in the contract. See you unless I see you first. Haha. Story 13. I don't know, but what I do know is that the renewal would cost money. Story 14. My parents would still be together, no matter how miserable they are. They keep saying it is because of me, and it breaks me. I want my dad to break free. Edit. Spelling and typos. Story 15. Less stability. More cheating if people already have one foot out the door. More psychological issues for children. Significant asset problems. Story 16. It may make it easier for victims of abuse to leave harmful marriages. Sometimes the divorce process is a major reason people stay. Story 17. There would be fewer marriages. If you are going into it thinking this is a 5-year deal, why even bother? Story 18. What everyone is missing is that this would reduce many early divorces. Many people would simply wait it out, though more people might be willing to marry earlier. Story 19. Nothing changes anywhere. If you get divorced after 5 or 10 years, you will have the same entanglements either way. Story 20. Even more matters for attorneys to handle and bill you for. Story 21. Marriage is like agriculture but for mating. It saves the time that would have been spent looking for a mate and allows us to focus on other things. 5 to 10 years is too short a span. It would probably mean fewer couples having children and, in general, an increase in anxiety levels. Story 22. I think it would cause many people to try harder to maintain their relationships. When someone has promised to stay with you no matter what, through sickness and in health until death, it is easy to become complacent. Look at the number of men and women who completely let themselves go after a couple of years of marriage. Many of them do it because they feel they do not have to try anymore. This often leads to resentment, loss of sexual attraction, bitterness, fantasizing about other people, cheating, and divorce. If you can get legally divorced when you are tired of each other, what was the point of being married or making those vows? I think marriage contracts are a good idea. You could use a sliding scale, a 2-year contract initially, then 5 years, then 7, then 10, and so on. Story 23. It depends on whether that means no one can leave the marriage or initiate a divorce before the contract is up for renewal. If someone signs the contract and needs to get out of the marriage before the renewal, are they stuck? Story 24. Sorry, only next of kin are allowed. But I am her husband and she is dying alone. You were her husband. Your marriage expired yesterday, and she is incapable of renewing it. Legally, you are now just some man off the street. Story 25. It would probably be outlawed by most branches of Christianity and other religions. It is also extremely unlikely that it would ever exist because, technically, marriage is a legal vow before the government. But as a wedding photographer, I would be excited. Yeehaw. Story 26. Marry someone who will not divorce you. That sounds simple, but some people do not think carefully before getting married. It is a huge commitment. If you are not ready, do not do it. Marriage is optional, no matter what anyone says. I like how it is designed. One issue is that divorce laws often favor women. That is a divorce-related issue, not an issue of marriage itself. My biggest piece of advice is this. If you plan to marry someone, marry them as they are. Do not expect them to change and do not try to change them. Look at the person you are marrying and ask, if they remained the same forever, would I be okay with that? If the answer is anything but yes, you are not ready to marry that person. You have to love them as they are. Otherwise, you are doing yourself and your partner a disservice. Regarding the specific practice, it could be acceptable. I would not partake and would not need it, but some marriages might benefit. It is up to the people involved how they want to handle it. Story 27. Most marriages these days seem to be 5 to 10-year contracts anyway. Story 28. I think many people will worry that their spouse will leave them around the 5 or 10-year mark. Story 29. People may want to buy out their contracts early. The median duration of a marriage in the United States is 8 years. Story 30. A book called The Memory of Earth by Orson Scott Card presents this concept in its society. That is about all I know from the book. I thought it was really bad and could not get past a few chapters. Story 31. Communication between spouses would improve. A lawyer friend once said, though he referred to a lease, it still applies. Contracts outline expectations. With the rise of semi-custom legal services, such as LegalZoom, couples could use templates that list topics to discuss before marriage. If one spouse gains weight, misuses substances, avoids dental care, considers quitting a job, or spends excessive time with friends, the contract provides guidance. Story 32. What is the point of getting married then? The whole idea is that you are saying this is your lifelong partner. Although some marriages do not work out, that misses the point of marriage completely. It would also make things more difficult. I cannot imagine having to deal with more paperwork. Story 33. We would have many more divorces because people would not want to stay together or might simply forget. Others who remember would celebrate each time they renewed. Story 34. I wouldn't have been married for 26 years. I love her, but if given the option, I would rethink things. Story 35. It could become a business. These contracts have to come from somewhere. I would rather spend time looking for a woman whose personality I like and who feels the same about mine. External things degrade over time and therefore mean nothing in the long run. I would rather not have to pay for a contract every 5 to 10 years. Also, domestic disputes would be easier to resolve if both parties were under a contract. Story 36. Would it be different? You can leave a marriage at any time. Story 37. Even more women would be raising children on their own after the fathers split up. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.